No president has ever done this in the history of the United States. This is a direct assault on Article 3 of our Constitution. And if he succeeds, we will no longer have a democracy. It's Trump's war on the last line of resistance. Now, when the founders of this republic came up with this idea of modern America, America, they borrowed an awful lot from the Iroquois Confederacy. And the Iroquois Confederacy was one of many Native American tribes who had developed a whole variety of basically small d democratic forms of governance over 20,000 years of political evolution living here on the North American continent. There were some tribes that were just kind of openly tyrannical, and there were many, but it seems the vast majority of tribes were largely small d democratic, and the Iroquois among them. And so what they got from their interactions with the Indians back in the day, and Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson in particular wrote about this at some length, and I quote them at length in my new book, The Hidden History of American Democracy, Rediscovering Humanity's Ancient Way of Living. What they came up with, this marvelous idea was that Europe had been ruled for thousands of years by either warlords or kings, who were usually the same thing, or the morbidly rich, who were also the kings, or the popes, right, theocrats. And in the case of England, Cromwell and company or whatever. But bottom line, it was either the religious, the rich, or the brutal, the warlords. And the founders of this Republic of America came up with this idea of, hey, can't the people rule themselves? I mean, look at it's working for the Indians. Why wouldn't it work for us? And the key to it all was that you would have a diffusion of power, that there would be three separate branches of government and a free press, the fourth estate essentially, that would balance power so that a tyrant could never emerge in the United States. A tyrannical government, an emperor, a pope, a king would never emerge. So you've got Congress, but Congress is checked by the presidency. The president could veto legislation or argue against it. You have the courts, but they're checked by Congress. Article 3, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, that Congress has the ability to overrule Supreme Court decisions by passing legislation or amending the Constitution. And then you've got the presidency, but the presidency is regulated in part by Congress, which defines by law what the president can and can't do, and also by the courts, who can restrain the president. Well, Trump has succeeded, and then of course you have the media, the fourth estate. Trump is suing a bunch of media agencies, so now you're seeing many in the media who are just kind of quietly no longer attacking Trump. And now on CNN has become unwatchable to me now because they are so invested in having a Republican on to speak back to every Democrat. And the Republicans just lie through their teeth, and the CNN hosts are afraid to contradict them. So, what we have now is a neutered media, or a substantially weakened media, and MSNBC is about to be spun off, and God only knows what's going to happen to that. So, we're kind of left with the Progress Channel on Sirius XM and Free Speech TV and a handful of, radio stations, both commercial and nonprofit across the country, as our liberal media, plus podcasts and things, Midas Touch and groups like that. So the media has been, weakened. Congress has been castrated. I mean, there's not a single member of Congress, Republican member of Congress, who's willing to stand up to Trump. And 3/4 of the Democrats aren't willing to stand up to Trump. There's just a handful. There's fewer than a dozen Democrats right now that are doing town halls in Republican districts. There should be 200. So, but everybody's afraid that Elon Musk is going to come in, thanks to, Clarence Thomas' deciding vote in Citizens United after, a billionaire spiffed him to the tune of hundreds of millions or millions of dollars. Clarence Thomas says, oh yeah, billionaires can buy elections, billionaires can own politicians. And so both Democrats and Republicans are terrified that Elon Musk, or in the case of Democrats, that AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, is going to come in and just destroy them, as we saw in the last election. So what's left to hold back Trump? It's the courts. Now, how do you access the courts? Through lawyers. And what Trump is doing now, he's issued 3 executive orders, one against Perkins Coie, one against Paul Weiss, and one against another law firm. I have to look it up, but there's 3 of the biggest law firms that traditionally represent Democrats. One of them worked for Hillary Clinton. One of them participated in the prosecution of Donald Trump in New York, or at least one of their lawyers did. I mean, he's punishing an entire law firm because they had hired a lawyer who did something that he didn't like. And this has the legal profession terrified. These law firms, the executive orders that Trump has issued say that the lawyers for these firms may not enter federal buildings. Well, how are you going to litigate in federal court if you can't walk into a federal courtroom? They're also denied access to secure or secret information, classified information. Well, how are you going to defend people who, for example, have been accused of leaking, or whistleblowing if you can't have access to the information? You can't. You simply can't defend those people. So these law firms, these 3 giant we're talking law firms that have 1,000 lawyers in them, have effectively been shut down in terms of their ability to defend anybody who's challenging Donald Trump. Now, the legal profession has yet to respond to this. There is a group of lawyers who work in these big firms who have put together a letter. So far it has 580 signatures, all of them lawyers in these big firms. None of them like partners, none of them like the major people who run the firms, saying this is a direct assault on democracy, and the leaders of these big firms need to speak up, and we need to do something about this. But so far, the big firms appear to be terrified into silence, frightened into silence, which means that, justice for people who are being screwed by the Trump administration has been badly kneecapped. And, and Trump is now threatening to issue more executive orders against more law firms now that he's shut down the big 3, or 3 of the big ones. Meanwhile, the Republican law firms are just going to town. Right? I mean, particularly in D.C., but also in New York, and to a certain extent around the country. You have big law firms that largely kind of lean to the left or the right. And Trump is going after all the ones that lean, or many of the ones that lean to the left. No president has ever done this in the history of the United States. This is a direct assault on Article 3 of our Constitution. And if he succeeds, we will no longer have a democracy.